As a fan of horror games, I happily rush into the arms of whatever scares me. But not everybody is so poorly wired for basic survival. Sometimes people, even gamers, are faced with experiences so terrifying it can keep them from playing a game they might otherwise enjoy. The ability to terrify is a greater power than we realize, but it's one that's actually being used to heal people. And although game developers are well aware they have this power, they're only just starting to use it responsibly. Games have gotten really good at replicating the physical sensation of being anxious because we all totally need help with that right now. When a hunter closes in on you in Dead by Daylight, you can hear your heart start to speed up. And you know you need to hustle. In Alien Isolation, the dynamic soundtrack hits you with a painful stinger to really underline the tension. And then makes you hold your breath to avoid being found. The Last of Us Part 2 uses this anxiety-driving capacity to turn otherwise familiar platforming sections into moments of acrophobic character development for Abby.
Vertigo hitting you hard? Especially when I look down.
The game features a dynamic system that increases Abby's reaction the more you lean over a ledge. Her breathing increases, the camera loses focus, the angle changes, and we get just a whiff of fisheye to really make us feel the uncanniness. These games emphasize the physical reaction to put your brain in the emotional space of being afraid, which is a brilliantly backwards version of how jump scares work. There's a sudden sound or movement that startles you, triggering a physiological response that indicates to you that you've been scared. But here, you experience somebody else having a physiological response, which causes you to think, oh, I should be concerned too, so your body starts to react in kind. There's a whole host of games that are anxiety-inducing without really intending to be. Yeah, I'm talking spiders. And giant spiders. They're a classic game enemy, a mid-level creature that always announces its presence with a smattering of webs. For me, donking a spider upside its many-eyed head is just another gameplay experience. But for people suffering from specific phobias, it can be a deal-breaker.
We just noticed that there was an intense fear, just paralyzation of when players would first see the spider, either in the video or even on in gameplay, and they would just walk away.
Adam is the director of Grounded, a survival game that has more than its fair share of legs.
We knew that the spiders were scary. There was a lot of jump scares on the team already, but I think that was the first time when we really started discussing it at a more serious level on the team.
Generally speaking, game developers do want people to play and like their games. And the team at Grounded especially wants their game to be playable by everybody, including people suffering from arachnophobia. So they knew they had to find a fix for their spider problem. But when you're dealing with serious phobias, you have to understand exactly why people are afraid in order to know how to de-escalate that fear. Luckily, neuropsychologists have already spent decades researching why games can make people anxious, and how they can be used to treat mental illness.
I always make sure that I include the term exposure therapy because it's not VR therapy. VR is a tool. The therapy is exposure therapy. That's what we're delivering.
This is Dr. Skip Rizzo, the neuropsychologist who runs the Medical Virtual Reality Lab at the University of Southern California. He's part of a team of researchers using VR to treat veterans suffering from PTSD.
PTSD is the result of somebody having a series of highly stressful events or one very impactful, threatening event. So you see people 3 months down the road still feeling as bad as they felt the day after the traumatic event. And that's not a sign of weakness. It's not any kind of a judgment, value judgment. It's just the way people's brains react to certain traumatic events and the residual impact that those traumatic events have on the brain.
That trauma can manifest itself as PTSD or in some cases as a phobia. To wildly oversimplify things, the thinking part of your brain can be totally aware that you aren't in danger. You're on land. Sharks can't get you. But the feeling part of your brain is convinced that you are under serious, imminent threat. Because what if land shark? When triggered, the feeling part of your brain will put your body into a state of stress that is, in a word, bad. PTSD and phobias can be treated with exposure therapy, where a patient is presented with the fearful situation, but in a safe space, and given time to de-escalate their emotional response. They're basically relearning how to feel about an experience.
But they would do it because they knew it was VR in the frontal lobes, but the limbic system was reacting like it was a real thing. And that was enough to show this, what we call extinction learning, where you're exposed to what you're fearful of, but you're in a safe place and nothing really bad happens. And as you expose yourself repeatedly, the fear extinguishes. The limbic system, the amygdala, gets less activated. Maybe there's a little bit more frontal lobe control of modulating emotion and so on.
Traditional imaginal exposure therapy relies on patients imagining themselves back in that traumatic experience, which in and of itself is traumatizing. It's still a useful therapy, but having a game or VR-based scenario removes the patient's burden.
VR's ability to get people to suspend disbelief, where they know they're in a lab or a conference hall, but their brain is reacting emotionally to the stimuli in the VR environment. And that's what we try to leverage in all clinical applications. We want to capture that emotional reaction.
Dr. Rizzo's team uses an app they specifically developed for this purpose. BraveMind was made in the Unity engine and features a variety of scenarios to address specific traumatic situations. But that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how games are being used therapeutically.
Helping to define a treatment plan for rehabilitating brain function, working with people on the autism spectrum for, say, job interview training, multiple sclerosis or ADHD, pain management, mindfulness, relaxation, meditation strategies.
Part of what makes games or VR so good at healing or messing up our brain meat is what psychologists call a sense of presence, which is sort of adjacent to immersion.
That's a technical description, immersion. Presence is more the psychological reaction to that immersion.
It can be affected by how good the graphics are, but it's more about how personal or interesting a simulation is to you, the player. The research conducted in the mid-90s, with mid-90s VR graphics, showed that phobic patients still felt a deep sense of presence when the simulation was specifically relevant to them, by being terrifying. So I might feel a high sense of presence when I'm fixing a generator and I hear that heartbeat, because I know I'm in danger of losing the game. But I could hop into a VR sim of a glass platform hovering over the Grand Canyon and not feel a sense of presence because I'm not afraid of heights. I'm not afraid of anything except losing. Players who have a strong emotional connection to a situation feel a high sense of presence. But on the flip side, a low sense of presence is how you can end up with a Sea of Thieves developer who's afraid of water.
And my worst fear? Ooh, I'd probably say it is probably drowning. I am really bad with water.
James is the lead engineer at Rare, and I was genuinely very surprised when he said this.
I'm so tempted to pivot this entire interview to delving into that, because you are working on Sea of Thieves, correct?
Yes.
Do you find that comes up at all while you're working on the game?
No, I think my mind at least can like make that distinction between like I don't mind going down into a shipwreck in Sea of Thieves because I know there's that barrier.
James isn't phobic of water, just afraid, and his emotional response isn't strong enough to overwhelm the knowledge of his safety. His immersion may be high, but his sense of presence isn't so strong that it makes him stressed out. Armchair psychoanalysis aside, I was actually talking to James because he's working on Rare's continual quest to improve accessibility.
Back at the start, there was all the design notion that we should try and make the world tactile and sensible. You know, if you're going to pick up a chest, you need to try and put some effort into it, pick it up and lug it off, so we'll hold down the button for it. Which sort of makes sense in isolation if you're trying to get a level of immersion, but actually then you now look at it through the accessibility lens and you don't need to hold it down.
The Sea of Thieves team recently added an auto float mode that cuts down on the amount of button pressing needed to swim, and this had an additional unexpected benefit. Thalassophobic players, that is, people who are afraid of deep water, can turn on auto float and remain blissfully above the waves like a sweet little floating coconut.
So it's a nice happy accident, and I think it lent into a philosophy that Xander Ashwell, our accessibility lead at Rare, tries to push, like options. Give people options. Don't assume you know what they want. So give them options to try and tailor the experience to their own needs.
Experimenting with options is exactly what they're trying to do with Grounded over at Obsidian. The Honey, I Shrunk the Kids aesthetic means that giant bugs are a given. You're at the bottom of the food chain now, and those ladybugs you used to sass are ready to even the score. But the team didn't want people to avoid the game just because of one enemy group, so they set about trying to find a solution to that age-old koan, how spidery does a spider have to be a spider?
What we found that there was a lot of studies on why people had this reaction, but not a lot of studies on like if there's any sort of ways to mitigate it.
So they conducted studies themselves to figure out where on the spider the scariness is stored. Specifically, it's not in the orbs. The result is this, a kind of spider slider, which also happens to be my favorite Steak and Shake burger. This feature works client-side, so my friend can be playing at minimum spider, while I play at maximum spider. We both get the options we want, and that's what the future's all about. Equity and maximum spiders. Both James and Adam were confident that this is just the start of a greater awareness of accessibility within the games industry.
The movement's almost spread around the studio that people realise that accessibility is within the hands of the designers, the engineers, the artists. And so if people really care passionately about something, they can try and push things through.
That's incredibly important because for all we talk about accessibility options, they aren't that optional for a lot of people. A lot of the times it's the difference between being able to play or not play a game. And as I mentioned before, developers do actually want you to play their games. And if that means ethically removing the legs, mandibles, and eyes of a spider, by God, so be it.
Tetris isn't something that is going to, you can make a case that it transfers to real world activities, but speed of processing, visual spatial abilities, the kinds of things that we try to improve with people with brain injuries, that's embodied in that game.